This is a film review of Detective Chinatown 1 and 2. Hi, you're watching AvenueX, where a junkie on good storytelling shares their thoughts, knowledge, and occasional weird ideas on stories and how they're told. So, the second installment of Detective Chinatown, 唐人街探案2, is now in cinema globally. Depending on where you are, you might be able to catch this film in cinema. It's been out for about a week and it's been doing phenomenally well within China's domestic box office. In this review, I'm going to talk about both films, so Detective Chinatown 1 and 2 together, because I find it's more interesting to look at those two films in comparison. First, if you haven't seen any of those two films, the first part of my review will be spoiler-free, and when the spoilers come, I will let you guys know. In terms of what kind of genre those films are, I would call them comedy/detective mystery solving films. So in the first film, we're introduced to this pair of detectives, Tang Ren and Qin Feng. Tang Ren is the distant uncle of Qin Feng, played by Wang Baoqiang. And Qin Feng, in the first film, is a high school graduate who was about to go into a police academy, but he failed at exam. So he traveled to Thailand to spend his summer with this distant uncle that he has never met. And when he landed, he soon realized his uncle got himself into some really big trouble, so they came together trying to solve a murder case. And the second film happens when Qin Feng already got into police academy and now he's the first year student. He gets a wedding invitation from Tang Ren saying that he's getting married in New York. So he travels to New York trying to attend this wedding, but realized there's no wedding and they actually have another murder case to solve. So pretty straightforward plotline and character setup. Now let's compare some interesting statistics of those two films. The first, Detective Chinatown, is 135 minutes long and the second one is 120, so it's actually 15 minutes shorter, and the 2 hours mark is generally the sort of perfect commercial movie length. And just by looking at this number, it's interesting to see actually the second movie, while they were making it, they have a much clearer picture of exactly what type of movie they're making and what kind of market they're targeting. And there are many other differences between those two movies that really does show you. The creative team, the director, people behind scenes are really trying to make this franchise. Hopefully in the future it can develop into a big franchise. A franchise that is very, very commercially and mainstream aimed. The first movie came out at the very end of 2015, so it was literally December the 31st. And the movie did extremely well. Given that it is comedy/detective story, such stories that are fully originated from China don't necessarily always do very well in cinema. So everybody considered the first movie to be a great success. But now, looking at the second film, it is doing so phenomenally well. And it's estimated by the end of the screening, this film should do about 4 to 5 times better than the first one. And that projected number converted into US dollars will be about over 600 million US dollars. Only China domestically, so that is actually really, really impressive. Because the first movie went out at the very end of 2015, so it's clearly a celebration of the Western calendar New Year movie. But the second one comes out on the first day of Chinese New Year of the Year of the Dog, so it's clearly aimed at this particular market, which is Chinese New Year market. And I think from a commercial perspective, they did a really good move, because during this time, everybody is at home, on holiday, people have time, people are in the mood of festivity, they want to go out with their families, probably go into a cinema. Most of the people who don't really go to cinema to watch films would probably go during this particular week. And it's very clear within the film itself that it's made to celebrate Chinese New Year, because at the very end, the end credits, similar to the first movie, all the actors come out and dancing in Times Square, and they would be actually calling out Happy Chinese New Year. So it's clearly that right from the beginning, they want to make this movie for this particular time of year. Now, I think this is actually a double-edged sword for this film, because on one hand, it does give it a better reception, more people would know about this franchise. But on the other hand, precisely because it is aimed at a Chinese New Year market, there are certain things it has to do, certain undertone it has to have. And there are quite a lot of a bit overhyped jokes and sort of forced festivity and happiness running along this film that I think doesn't necessarily contribute to the quality of the storytelling. When the first film came out, people went into cinema to watch this film because of Wang Baoqiang. He's a well-established actor. If you don't know much about him, his life story is so interesting. He's the perfect example of grassroots underdog who by anyone's standard cannot be a film or drama or TV star, but somehow made it. He is the name that got people into cinema. And once they got in, they realized this film has two male leads. So it's a pair of leads and they go out and solving crimes. They're similar really to Sherlock and Watson. And they realized the young man and the Sherlock within this combination, Liu Haoran, is a very young but very capable actor with great potentials. And then within the last 2 years, this young man really shot to stardom, particularly right at the end of last year, first in Legend of Demon Cat, directed by Chen Kaige, and then as the lead in Nirvana in Fire 2. So he suddenly became very, very well known now, and his fandom just exploded. So with that, this film came out. For its box office, counting in the New Year's element, counting in Wang Baoqiang's existing fandom, but also counting in the explosively growing Liu Haoran's fandom, this film really got lucky in terms of when it comes out. And for the younger generation, so I would say under 30, even 40 years old, most people actually went in to see Liu Haoran instead of Wang Baoqiang. And I can tell this is going to be the trend for this franchise. When the third movie, which is going to be set in Tokyo, Liu Haoran is going to take the definite lead. He will be the person who would attract people to go into cinema to see it. I've seen both films. I saw the first one just on my computer screen, but I did went into cinema to see the second one. If you ask me which one I prefer, I would actually say story-wise, I prefer the first one, because I think at that stage, that was the first movie of its sort that came out of China, and the young director, Chen Sicheng, however bad his personal life scandal is in China, he is a very talented creative. And I think at that point, they weren't sure, obviously, how exactly people are gonna react, whether it's going to be a success, and exactly what this film should be. So when you watch that, you can tell it doesn't quite know exactly what it itself is. So it's testing, it's trying to be different things at different times. But now when you look at the second movie, it's so clear that the creative behind this film now know exactly what they're doing. They know who their target audience is, they know where they want to move the story, they know what type of film they want to make. It is trying to create this original franchise of detective story of those two characters making up a pair, going to different places in the world, solving crimes, while mixing this type of comedy that's very specific, I would say, to Chinese cinema, especially heavily influenced by Hong Kong's type of comedy. If you're familiar with Zhou Xinzhi's film, that kind of 无厘头 and very wacky comedy style. I'm really happy to see that, just because there really isn't another such attempt at a franchise that coming out of China these days. From now on, there will be spoilers. Comparing to the first Detective Chinatown, I would say the second one does feel a little bit too rushed, too quick, and too noisy and too hyped. And a lot of jokes are too forced onto people. Now, I think that's also partially due to the fact that it is a Chinese New Year movie. So it needs to be more hyped than usual. And also, I think because they put themselves in the corner that they decided to shoot this in New York, and it is actually mostly shot in New York. There are many scenes that you do feel they're trying to show you more of the city as much as they can. So there are scenes of people running down Madison Avenue naked, driving the horse cart across Times Square, running through the Central Station, chasing the killer. All these things, you know, they're there because they're in New York and they kind of feel obliged to show that, whereas it doesn't necessarily integrate very well into the storytelling. It could well happen in anywhere. It doesn't have to be Times Square or Madison Avenue or the station. And so these does feel less well integrated into the story than the first one, where they're running through Bangkok and they're actually using the markets, using the rivers for their escape or for their storytelling. The second one does feel like, because we're in New York, we just have to do this. And also the scene that happens in the hospital where they're dressed up as nurses. That is just so illogical. Like, that part is just like, how could you run into a locker room and just happen to have stockings and a wig lying there that will fit you 3 people? And what's the point of dressing like that? Because you're trying to go undercover and you dress like that, everybody is looking at you, people's coffee are falling out of their hands. And these things are clearly made just to make you laugh, but it doesn't fit into the logic of the storytelling. So I hope in the 3rd movie, when it's set in Tokyo, they could really work on the script to somehow make the story really sink into its geolocation, so it really can only happen there. It couldn't happen anywhere else, and everything that you do makes logical sense. Because after all, it's still a detective film. It needs, like, rationality and logic is the first and most important thing for this film. The trend of where this franchise, this story, these 2 characters, the main 2 characters are going now is showing, and it's kind of very clear now what they're trying to go for. If you do like detective dramas, you probably know BBC's Sherlock, and I think this franchise didn't hide the fact that it heavily refers to that body of work. It refers to the tradition of a pair of people going out solving crimes like the old-time Sherlock and Watson, and it also uses a lot of those mind palaces kind of sequences that you see in Sherlock and putting that onto Liu Haoran's character in Detective Chinatown. And now at the end of the 2nd movie, we could tell that the young man, the younger one within the pair's character, is going to become the more interesting character for the future movies because he is the one who has more layers. He is the high-functioning sociopath within this pairing, and he's the person who has too good a brain. At the moment when his life was about to end, brain is still working on details and solving cases instead of, having a natural human emotional response. So that point is very clearly picked out at the very end of the 2nd movie, so we can see he would be the darker character of the 2. What I don't like about this pairing is that if you look at Sherlock and Watson, especially in the BBC version, although obviously Sherlock is the brain, Watson is the heart, they're more equal in terms of their importance to the story, their importance to each other. And Watson in Sherlock's story is himself a very capable man. He is a doctor, he knows his profession, he can do pretty amazing things like, being a very good shooter. Whereas in Detective Chinatown, Wang Bangchang's character is really just there to make things funny. He is the comic relief. He's the person who always accidentally stumbles upon things or just say something that inspires the clever brain to figure out things. And that for the present 2 films did work well, but how long could it last? If they're going to make more of those movies, you can't just always hinge everything upon the clever guy. So in terms of how this pairing of characters is going to work, I do feel a little bit worried about where the story could go into the future. So would I recommend these 2 films? I would definitely say yes, because they are very well produced, properly produced entertainment mainstream films. You're not going to see masterpieces, not even say great detective stories, because it's pretty easy to guess who is the bad guy in both films, especially in the 2nd film actually. The first instance, the killer showed up on screen, literally the first shot. I knew it was that person. It's just too obvious to me. And even at the very end, the final twist where you find out more about a certain character that you got introduced very early on in the story, I was expecting that the whole way. Like the first moment he showed up, I was like, yeah, he's going to be the guy who has the final twist. I'm just waiting for exactly what you're gonna do with it. So you're not going to see great detective stories that's gonna just blow your brain out. But I would say it's fairly well done that you wouldn't feel your intelligence is insulted in any way, and it is very fast-pacing and very entertaining movie, so you can just go in and enjoy your 2 hours time. Although there is a small problem that I can see is a lot of the jokes and the funny bits that these 2 movies have hinges upon your understanding of Chinese language and its cultural reference. So there are a lot of punchlines, a lot of little snippets of things that will make Chinese people laugh because we understand what it's referring to. But if you don't know the language, you don't know the culture, you're not familiar with the current vocabulary, then you may just get lost at places. So if you don't speak Chinese, but you do have a Chinese friend, it might be a good thing to have that person next to you while you watch the movie. So that's my review of Detective Chinatown 1 and 2, 唐人街探案, and I'll see you in my next video. Meanwhile, live long and happy film watching.